Dear participants of the Dubna conference, dear Professor Bolshakov, I feel very honored that you again allow me to address your conference, especially at this extremely dramatic and exciting moment in history. Experiencing right now a world revolution. We are seeing the collapse of the paradigm of globalization. And it is maybe an irony of history that this paradigm only lasted about 25 years. It started to come into being with the disintegration of the Soviet Union in '91, and it was characterized by the idea that there should be an unipolar world, that it would be legitimate to topple governments which would not submit to this unipolar world by means of regime change, color revolution, or even wars based on lies, as we have seen so plentiful in the Middle East. Now, the economic side of this globalization went along with neoliberal monetarism, which created the condition where the rich became so rich that there is no way how they can live of what they have accumulated. The middle class would drop into poverty, and for an increasing mass of poor people, they would become so poor that despite many jobs or no job at all, they could not make the ends meet. Now, this has been the reason that there was a revolt. First in June in Great Britain with the Brexit. This continued with the election of Donald Trump in the United States. And we just saw the no to the referendum in Italy, which had essentially the same reason, complete mistrust of the population against an establishment which has been completely out of sync with the interest of the common good and the common people. Now, this revolution, I dare to predict, will continue until the injustices which are associated with it, which have killed many people either in war or by economic means, it will continue until these injustices are corrected. Now, the good news is that an alternative is already in place. You know that we were extremely engaged in the same 25-year period with the idea of building a Eurasian land bridge, which we already in '91 called the New Silk Road, that we have promoted this idea of a new world economic order based on principles of physical economy as they were proposed by Mr. Larush since almost 50 years, that should become the basis for a new world economic order. Now, after many difficulties, finally in September 2013, President Xi Jinping, in an address in Kazakhstan, put the New Silk Road on the international agenda. And what you have seen in the meantime is an unbelievable speed of cooperation among nations in Asia, but also in other parts of the world, all based on the principle of a win-win cooperation, whereby naturally China is exporting the very successful Chinese model of economy. After all, China was able to develop its own economy in a period of 30 years, what the industrialized world needed almost 200 years. Now, China is exporting this Chinese model, but it is doing so on the basis of a win-win conception. That is the idea that all the participating countries have equal benefits and advantages. It's the same idea like the Peace of Westphalia, that foreign policy can only succeed if it is in the interest of the other. Now, I know that in the beginning, there was a certain amount of debate in Russia if this would be against Russian interest. But in the meantime, I think a very successful process has developed. The latest at the Vladivostok Economic Forum in September, with the participation of President Putin, Prime Minister Abe from Japan, and many others, and 2,500 delegates from many Asian countries, there was a big integration of the One Belt, One Road policy with the Eurasian Economic Union. And that integration is moving very, very rapidly forward. It now already involves more than 100 nations and international institutions. It involves integration of infrastructure, high technology cooperation, especially in the field of energy and nuclear energy. It involves space cooperation. And it has become a very attractive dynamic, which after Vladivostok, this integration continued at the G20 summit in Hangzhou. It followed with the ASEAN conference in Laos. Then it went to the Goa BRICS annual conference in India. And the latest example was the ASEM conference in Peru, where many Latin American countries are now joining this development. Now, this is an economic model which is also already reaching Europe with the 16+1 countries of Central and Eastern Europe, who are now all cooperating with China on the development of infrastructure. But it is very clear you cannot work from Eastern and Central Europe with China without going through Russia and without being part of this. So it's becoming a real peace order. Now, the EU has been extremely offish, not taking up Xi Jinping's offer of a win-win cooperation. They also have naturally not taken up President Putin's many offers for cooperating of a Eurasian integration from the Atlantic to the Pacific. But now with the election of Donald Trump, there may be a change in the situation. Now, this is not yet decided, but it is a potential. One thing is very clear. If Hillary Clinton would have been elected, we in all likelihood would have been on a very short road to World War III. Now, very hopefully, this is changing because Trump already had phone conversations with President Putin and President Xi and said that he wants to normalize the relationship between Russia and the United States. Now, that obviously is not enough, but Trump also had promised that he would implement Glass-Steagall, the banking separation law of Franklin D. Roosevelt, and that he would invest in the first 100 days of his office into a $1 trillion infrastructure program for the United States to make the infrastructure in the United States the most modern in the world. Now, there he has a big job to do, given the fact that the infrastructure in the United States is completely falling apart. But this is potentially the solution, because the Schiller Institute, which published the booklet of 370 pages, The New Silk Road Must Become the World Land Bridge, we added one chapter, namely that the United States must join the New Silk Road, because the United States needs a massive infrastructure program. Now, if Trump will realize that, and there is a good reason that he may do that, because he's a businessman and he, as President Putin just noted, has been successful and probably will find his new responsibilities on a higher level. But also the chairwoman of the Chinese parliament, Madame Fu Ying, in a conference in New York just said that the proposal by Trump to have a US infrastructure program can be a bridge to the New Silk Road and the One Belt, One Road policies. Now, if that program can be successfully put on the agenda, there is indeed a hope. Now, Mr. Larush, who would have liked to also send you greetings, however, he unfortunately has a severe cold right now, but he greets you anyhow. He has been emphasizing that the only way how the world can get out of this present crisis requires at an absolute minimum the implementation of 4 basic laws. Now, the first law is to go back to the banking separation of Glass-Steagall of Franklin D. Roosevelt, to do exactly what Roosevelt did in 1933, to separate the investment banks from the commercial banks, the derivatives and the foul credits, the unpayable debt, and just stop to have the casino economy. If the investment banks have to close, then that's all the better, because we really don't need this casino aspect of the economy. Then the second law goes back to the idea of a national bank, which first was defined by Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, which basically implies the idea that a sovereign government has the right to issue credit, provided it is only going into productive investment. Now, I think this is a very important point in Russia right now because of the various economic heritages coming from the Yeltsin period, and the question of, where is the power to generate credit. I think this idea for Russia is extremely important, that a sovereign government has the right to issue credit. And I don't mean money, I don't mean reserves, I don't mean taking money on the financial open markets. I mean something completely different. I'm saying that the sovereign government has the right to issue credit lines for investment in those areas of the economy in which you would also invest if the economy would be in good shape. Now, this was exactly what not only Alexander Hamilton did, but also what Lincoln did with the greenbacks, but especially also Franklin D. Roosevelt, by making a New Deal where the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, after the Glass-Steagall implementation, issued credits for huge, large-scale infrastructure projects such as the Tennessee Valley Authority project and others, and with that took the United States out of the Depression and made it one of the most, at the end of the Second World War, the most prosperous nation in the world. And it was exactly the same kind of credit mechanism which was used in Germany in the post-war period by the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau to finance investment and the reconstruction of Germany. And this led to the economic miracle which everybody admired in a few years. Now, in 1931, there was a presentation by Dr. Wilhelm Lautenbach in front of the Reichsministerium in Germany, which essentially proposed exactly what Roosevelt would later introduce 2 years in the United States. What Dr. Lautenbach said is if you have the coincidence of a world depression and a world currency crisis, and the usual market mechanisms do not function anymore, the only way how this can be addressed is by the state. The state has the right and the power to issue credit, and provided that credit goes into real production based on physical principles, then it is not inflationary, and that is the only way how you can get the economy going. Now, that would also function in Russia today. There is no question about it. If people would leave the idea of money, but go to the idea of physical economy only instead. Now, the fourth law, which Mr. Larush is insisting as absolutely crucial, is you have to have a crash program for the development of fusion power and international space cooperation, because the world economy is lacking qualitative increases in productivity because of the paradigm of globalization. Investments in basic research and development in the last 25 years was neglected to the point that the world economy today is not in a position to take care of the existing world population. And you can only remedy that by a gigantic leap in productivity, which must be the result of higher levels of energy flux density in the production process. And the absolutely necessary next step in this direction is fusion power. Now, thermonuclear fusion solves several problems at the same time. And as you know, there were breakthroughs being made in the Stellarator in Greifswald in Germany in the last year, but also in the Chinese East model. And all it needs is appropriate funding to get such a crash program to lead to the success and potential commercial use of fusion power. Now, fusion power would give you energy and raw material security for the entire world. And it would also solve the problem of giving mankind a new form of propulsion for space travel. And in that way, shortening the time tremendously, which is absolutely necessary if you want to go to longer space flights, such as Mars. Now, the Chinese are very much advanced. For example, they want to land on the far side of the moon next year. And they have invited many, many countries to join the Chinese space station, which will be ready in the year 2022. And they will mine helium-3 from the far side of the moon as a fuel for a fusion economy on the Earth. Now, this is all very exciting. And I think that, the idea that, mankind is the only creative species. And as Mr. Larush has said many, many times, we are the only known creative species in the universe so far. That does not mean that we may not eventually find other intelligent beings from other galaxies. Since there are about 2 trillion galaxies, it's a big question. But I think we are on the verge of a completely new paradigm. If we go now for those kinds of scientific breakthroughs, which are of the level like Albert Einstein, the question of what is the role of man in the universe and how can we think about ourselves, our creative mentation as the most developed aspect of the universe, then we can change the identity of humanity so that we become truly adult and that we work together like, geniuses of different nations and different cultures can easily work together, like astronauts, that we, understand the common aims of mankind is that, which we must pursue and not geopolitical aims. And I think we are on the verge of such a new paradigm. I think if we all act together now to use this potential of, hopefully changing the United States, getting a new cooperation between the United States and Russia, move to a completely new model of economy on that, which many people have called the common destiny or the common future of the one mankind. I think we have a great future ahead of us.